The late spring light was fading when Eliza Carter stepped out onto her small porch, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. The smell of baking bread drifted through the open door behind her, mingling with the damp scent of the marsh beyond the tree line. Somewhere in the distance, a lone whippoorwill called, and the quiet of the evening wrapped around her like a familiar shawl. Life in the outskirts of Boston was never truly quiet anymore, not since the Redcoats had tightened their patrols, but tonight felt unusually still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Eliza was used to solitude. Since her husband, Thomas, had been killed at Bunker Hill the year before, she had lived alone in the modest clapboard house they'd built together. Neighbors passed by now and then with cautious nods, but most kept to themselves. In these times, trust could be dangerous. She was turning back inside when she heard it, a stumbling footstep in the dirt lane that ran behind her house. It was followed by another, uneven, as if each step cost the walker a terrible effort. Eliza froze, one hand braced on the doorframe, straining to listen. Then she saw him. A man emerged from the shadows between the willows, half collapsing as he crossed into the open. His coat was torn, his shirt soaked dark with blood. A battered satchel hung from his shoulder, and one arm clutched it as if his life depended on whatever was inside. Even from 10 yards away, Eliza could see he was a stranger. His boots thick with mud from somewhere far off, his eyes sharp but clouded with pain. He stumbled once more, dropping to one knee, and when his gaze found hers, he managed only one hoarse word. "Please." Eliza's heart thudded. Harboring anyone the British deemed an enemy could mean prison, or worse. But the man's pallor told her he wouldn't survive the night if left outside. She glanced toward the main road, the setting sun glinting off something metallic in the distance. Muskets. Patrol. Without another thought, she darted forward, looping his good arm over her shoulder. "Inside, quickly," she hissed. He gritted his teeth against the pain, but let her guide him through the back door. In the dim kitchen, Eliza eased him into a chair, eyes scanning his wound, a deep gash along his side seeping steadily. "They're coming," he whispered, nodding toward the window. She could hear them now, the rhythmic crunch of boots, the murmur of voices growing louder. There was no time to dress the wound. She made her choice in a heartbeat, pulling up the rug near the hearth to reveal a narrow hatch Thomas had built years ago for winter storage. It was barely big enough for a man to lie flat, but it was the only chance. "Get in," she urged. He hesitated, clutching his satchel, then slid down into the dark space. Eliza pulled the hatch shut, dropping the rug over it just as a hard knock rattled the front door. She drew a slow breath, smoothing her apron, and opened it to find 3 redcoats framed against the last light of day. The tallest stepped forward, his eyes sweeping the room. "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice clipped. "We're searching for a rebel courier, badly wounded. Came this way not half an hour ago." Eliza forced a polite smile. "I've seen no one." But behind her, faint and muffled, came the sound of a cough. Eliza's pulse roared in her ears as the cough faded. She prayed the redcoats hadn't heard it, but the sergeant's eyes narrowed just enough to send a cold shiver down her spine. "Mind if we look around?" he asked. It wasn't really a question. "Of course," she said, stepping aside with what she hoped was convincing calm. Her palms were damp, her mind scrambling for a way to keep them away from the hearth. 2 soldiers began moving through the kitchen, their heavy boots thudding on the floorboards. One knelt to peer under the table while the other yanked open the pantry door. Eliza stayed near the sergeant, forcing her voice to steady. "Would you like some bread? It just came out of the oven." The offer bought her a moment. The sergeant waved the others off for a second, sniffing the air. "Smells fine," he said, though his gaze wandered again toward the hearth rug. Eliza stepped closer to block his view. "Boston must be busy with all this searching," she said. "Is it true the fighting's worsened?" He studied her, perhaps weighing whether she was simply making conversation or hiding something. Before he could answer, one of the soldiers called from the back door. "No sign here, sir. Tracks vanish in the marsh." The sergeant gave a curt nod and turned to leave. "If you see anyone, report it at once. Rebels are dangerous, even to decent folk like yourself." "I will," she said, forcing her voice not to waver. When the door finally shut and their footsteps faded, Eliza's knees nearly gave out. She hurried to the hearth, pulling up the rug and opening the hatch. The stranger's face was pale in the flicker of firelight, his breath shallow. He clutched the satchel to his chest. "They're gone," she whispered. "For now." He eased himself up with a wince, sitting on the floor. "Thank you. You've likely saved my life." Eliza fetched a basin of water and her small store of bandages. As she cleaned the wound, he flinched but stayed silent. The cut was deep but not beyond help. "Hold this here," she said, pressing a folded cloth to the gash. He nodded. "Name's Samuel Wright. I was carrying something important. If it doesn't reach the right hands, men will die." His satchel was worn, its leather stained. She noticed a tear along one side where the flap had been hastily sewn back. When he set it down for a moment, she glimpsed the corner of a parchment inside, creased, singed at the edges. "What is it?" she asked. Samuel's eyes darted toward the window. "Best you don't know. Safer that way." Eliza wanted to argue, but the fear in his voice stopped her. Outside, somewhere down the road, a neighbor's dog began barking. Samuel's gaze hardened. "They'll be back. And next time they won't knock so politely." The following morning broke gray and damp, a thin mist curling off the marsh and creeping into the yard. Eliza had slept little, dozing in the chair by the hearth with her ear tuned for every sound outside. Samuel lay on a thin mattress near the fire, his color slightly better but his strength still weak. She had just ladled out some thin porridge when the knock came, not the sharp rap of soldiers, but the hesitant tapping of her neighbor, Mrs. Alden. Eliza's stomach tightened. Mrs. Alden was a woman who saw too much and remembered more. "I thought I'd bring you some eggs," the older woman said as she stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes roamed over the small kitchen, lingering a moment too long on the extra cup by the table. "You've had company." "Just myself," Eliza replied smoothly, setting the porridge bowl down as if she hadn't noticed the question. "I was making breakfast for later." Mrs. Alden's gaze swept toward the hearth. For one tense heartbeat, Eliza thought she might hear Samuel shifting in the next room. She forced a cheerful tone. "Would you like tea?" The neighbor declined, muttered something about soldiers searching the west road, and finally left. Eliza waited until her figure vanished down the lane before letting out a long breath. Samuel emerged from the back, leaning on the wall. "She suspects something," he said quietly. "She suspects everyone," Eliza replied, though the truth was, suspicion had a way of spreading. That afternoon, the distant thud of boots reached them long before the Redcoats came into view. This time there were more, half a dozen, led by a sergeant with sharp eyes and a scar down his jaw. Eliza recognized him instantly. Sergeant Halford, a man who had once bought tools from her late husband. His expression now held no warmth. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his tone formal but heavy with something personal. "We'll be searching again." She stepped aside, hands clasped in front of her. Inside, her mind spun. If they searched the hearth too closely, Samuel would be finished. Halford's men moved with methodical precision, overturning baskets, opening cupboards. One soldier even tapped along the walls, listening for hollow spots. Samuel crouched in the hidden space, holding his breath, the muffled creak of the floorboards above him like a drumbeat. Then a small voice piped up from the doorway, a child from the lane, clutching a wooden toy. "Mr. Soldier," the boy said innocently, "did you know there's a secret place under her floor?" Every muscle in Eliza's body went rigid. Halford turned sharply, his eyes narrowing on her. "Is that so?" Eliza forced a tight smile. "Old storage space, empty now. You're welcome to look." Her mind raced. If they opened it, Samuel's mission would be over. She needed something fast, something to pull them away. And as her gaze fell on the pot of boiling laundry by the stove, an idea began to form. Dangerous, but the only chance they had. Eliza moved quickly, lifting the heavy pot from the stove with both hands. Steam hissed upward, and the smell of lye soap filled the air. "Careful there," she said, letting the pot tilt just enough for the soldiers nearest the hearth to instinctively step back. "The last thing we need is scalded boots." Her feigned clumsiness worked. One man muttered and turned toward the doorway. Another followed, grumbling about the smell. Only Halford remained fixed in place, his gaze sharp. "Show me," he said, nodding toward the rug. Eliza forced a steady breath. "If you insist." She set the pot down slowly, buying time. "It's nothing more than an old storage hatch. My late husband used it for winter preserves." She bent, hands on the rug, when a loud shout came from outside. "Sergeant! We've found tracks in the marsh." Halford's attention snapped toward the open door. In an instant, Eliza straightened and stepped between him and the hearth. "You'd better see to that," she said. He hesitated, long enough for her to fear he might still search, but then he barked for his men to follow. Within moments, the Redcoats were gone, their boots thudding down the lane. Eliza didn't waste a second. She yanked back the rug, pulled open the hatch, and peered into the dim space. Samuel's eyes glinted in the half-light. "They'll be back," he said, his voice rough. "We have to move now." She helped him up, grabbing his satchel and a small bundle of bread and cheese. The night air outside was cold and damp, the mist clinging to their clothes as they slipped out the back and into the marsh. They moved in silence, Samuel leaning on her more than once. The narrow paths through the reeds twisted and forked, but Eliza knew them well. Her father had taken her here to fish when she was a girl. At the far edge of the marsh, they reached a line of scrub trees and the faint outline of the old mill road. A dim glow flickered ahead, a checkpoint. Two redcoats stood by a small fire, their muskets propped against a cart. Samuel's grip tightened on her arm. "We can't fight our way through." "No," she whispered, "but we can walk through if they think we belong." She pulled her shawl tighter, supporting him as if he were a drunken relative. As they approached, she called out, "Evening, sirs, taking my cousin home from the tavern. Got himself too deep in the cider." One soldier smirked, the other waved them on with a bored flick of his hand. Within minutes, the firelight was behind them and the open road ahead. By dawn, they reached the low ridge where the Patriot scouts waited. Samuel handed over the satchel with a look of relief so deep it almost broke her. "You've done more than you know," he told her. "This will save men's lives." Eliza watched as he disappeared with the scouts into the trees. Alone again, she turned toward home, the drumbeat of her heart finally slowing, knowing the war had quietly passed through her kitchen, and that she had not faltered.